Okay, hello everyone. Hope you can hear me. Sorry if there's any hiccups with this. I'm just new to using StreamYard. Uh, but I'm here with Endeavour,
Hi, thanks for having me on.
and sorry I had that playing in the background, and I thought the audio was coming through twice.
Yeah, it happens at the
Yeah,
beginning of every stream.
yeah. Um, yes. So sorry. Yes, I'm here with Endeavour, and we're going to be talking about the state of Canada and Canadian history. Um, so Endeavour, do you want to just introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, my name is Endeavour. I run the YouTube channel of that same name. I talk about politics, history, culture, philosophy from a right-wing reactionary perspective. I'm a Canadian. I do make some Canada-centric content, but most of mine is not entirely Canadian focused, but is obviously something of great importance to me. Yeah, and I've been doing it for about 2 years now, and I enjoy always speaking with other Canadian content creators.
Yeah, thanks. I've was introduced to your stuff through the Distributist back when you did some collabs with him, and it was refreshing to find a right-wing Canadian commentator because I'm sure you know there aren't a lot of those out there. Um, but yeah, my channel is very new. It's only a little over a month old. Um, I talk about a lot of Canadian stuff, but I don't try to hold myself just to that. Um, and my channel is called Settlers Lament. It's a reference to a song called Scarborough Settlers Lament. Uh, Stan Rogers did a cover of it, though I don't think I'm pretty sure the song's older than him.
Hmm.
Um, are you familiar with Stan Rogers, by the way?
No, I'm not. Was it about Scarborough in Ontario?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh boy.
He's you should check him out. He died very young. A very good Canadian folk singer. Kind of feels like the last of Canadian history in a way. He had 5 albums all about Canadian history, um, and they were all quite good. He was a bit of a left winger, I think, in his personal life, but it doesn't really come through in his music. Um, but uh, but yes. Yes, on the topic of Canadian history, uh, I'm relatively young, 23, and having grown up uh, in this current cultural zeitgeist, uh, Canadian history has almost felt entirely dead for basically my entire life. Um, I'm not even sure if you would have asked me when I was 12 or something like that what I would have even thought Canadian history was. I doubt I would have been able to name a single important figure. I don't think I learned who John A. Macdonald was. For any non-Canadians, that's our first prime minister. I don't think I even knew who he was until high school. Growing up, I certainly knew far more about American history than I knew about Canadian history. Um, and what bits of Canadian history I did know was almost exclusively about various grievance groups. Um, the uh, the horrible things that were done to the Chinese who built our railroads, the Komagata Maru incident, all these things which actually analyzing them seem at best minor incidents, but were treated like they were great moral stains on Canada. And of course, the residential schools was the biggest thing, though that only started becoming popular really once I got into high school. Though I did hear about it occasionally in elementary school. Um, but it's not even that Canada was dying in my childhood. It's that Canada didn't even seem to be a thing. And I've talked with a lot of Canadians about this, their experience with history from a young age. And I often get similar stories for people in my age range. So I do have some people that say they got a much more traditional patriotic history lessons from a young age. I'm assuming these people must live in much more conservative parts of the country. But just I know I've heard you talk about this in some of your videos, but what was your experience growing up with Canadian history?
Much of the same. I am from Toronto. I'm 24, so I'm about the same age as you. And when we grew up, we had in elementary school, we had something about the pioneers. we did a few units on them. We did a few units on colonialism and stuff. And to be honest, it was actually probably my favorite subject. And maybe I got in just before they really cranked up the the white guilt factor. But yeah, I guess they didn't really do very much to connect it to the society as it existed today. Like, you'd say we did learn about the French settlers in Quebec, Samuel de Champlain, who else? Jacques Cartier from before him, and we learned a bit about the Plains of Abraham, James Cook, James Wolfe, and a few important figures. And I think in middle school we did a unit on Confederation, so we learned about people like MacDonald, and then the other various figures from back then, Thomas D'Arcy McGee, and people like that. But I guess one of the problems was that even from a young age, I kind of saw that the society being described in our history really wasn't one that existed in any real sense. Certainly not in Toronto. I mean, that might have been the case in other parts of the country, but like you mentioned, Scarborough, for example, a song about the settlers in Scarborough. If you go to Scarborough today, you'll find anything but settlers there. I mean, it's maybe like I did a video about a church I saw in Scarborough the day before I left Toronto, and Scarborough is actually like less than 25% white, and of that, how many of them are actually even founding settler stock of Canada? Probably maybe half of that. So I mean, that's you really kind of see you really kind of see that nation that would have existed pre-1965 being erased. And I'll give them credit. They did, our enemies, they did a really good job in essentially within one generation erasing, maybe two. You could argue more than one, but within just over a generation, essentially erasing an entire history, or at least making it irrelevant to the country as it exists today, unfortunately. And a lot of people are growing up with the same experience. Like, a lot of people don't even know what the British Empire was. They don't know that the Queen is the head of state of Canada. And I mean, on one hand, it is really disappointing because it's actually a very interesting history, and it's something that I am very proud of myself. But on the other hand, I also kind of have to understand that it is kind of true that they've made it irrelevant by design. Like, they've done their best to actually like uproot that. And I mean, does it really exist in the same sense as it would have, pre-1965? It's a question that we have to ask. And I mean, maybe in certain parts of the country, I'd say the answer is yes. Maybe on places like the Maritimes, I definitely enjoy that part of the country. But then when you look at places like Vancouver, Toronto, it's basically just a globalized city and could exist anywhere.
Yeah. I've only ever experienced living in the big multi-culti cities, and I've never even visited the Maritimes, so I very much would like to at one point. But I mean, I think a good example of this disconnect that a lot of Canadians have with Canadian history is like the Red Ensign. For those of you who don't know, the Red Ensign was the flag of Canada for most of Canada's existence from 1967 until 1965, so almost 100 years.
Yeah, 1867, sorry.
Sorry. 1867 to 1965. So almost 100 years. And so the current flag that you're probably familiar with is we've had for less of amount of a time than the Red Ensign. Yet today, I don't know if most Canadians even know what the Red Ensign is. Certainly, I don't think most Canadians from my generation. I didn't know what it is until I think grade 12, where I just happened to have a teacher in grade 12 who was obsessed with the Red Ensign and loved it, which is actually kind of funny because he was a huge left-winger in every way. He loved the NDP, but for whatever reason, he loved the Red Ensign too. And he had one at the back of class and everything. But like, I mean, my mother was born when the Red Ensign was still our flag, and she had no idea what the flag was. And I've met plenty of both boomers and people from my generation that they simply have never seen the flag before, or they never have recognized, or they would recognize it if they have seen it before. So it's just there's a whole aspect of Canadian history. There's like 400 years. There's even before Confederation. There's lots of Canadian history that most Canadians seem to be totally disconnected from. That they barely even know exist. And that's why, to me, currently, it feels like, at least for the majority of places in Canada, as you said, perhaps it's different in certain places like the Maritimes or perhaps certain parts of rural Canada, it feels like Canada's already dead. I had a long phase from probably around grade 12 until quite recently, where I really felt Canadian nationalism. I really wanted to revitalize Canadians' connection with their history. But the more that I've thought about it, it doesn't seem like Canadian history is comatose. It seems like it's already gone. It seems like there isn't really much to reconnect people to. I wish there was something still there, but it just doesn't seem like there's anything left for the vast majority of Canadians. And I feel like whether we like it or not, we're more in a phase where we need to deal with what the future will be with us as not just as whites, but as whites, Christians, whatever, as being a inevitable minority, and understanding what exactly that will mean in the future, and understanding what the new Canada will be. I'm not sure if the new Canada will be Justin Trudeau's multi-culti Canada. The fact that they abort all their babies means that I think Justin Trudeau's progressivism will probably give way to something else. But it's not going to be our country either, whatever it is. And I think it's more understanding what being a minority will mean is something we'll have to get used to.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that one of the things that I always try to avoid is, I guess, dwelling over what's already gone. It's a very unhealthy mindset to be in because, as much as you can have appreciation for something, you have to understand that, you can't. When something's gone, it's gone.
Yeah, it's like a Dr. Seuss quote, I think. Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened.
Yeah, I think that, but the best way to address that is that you want to essentially create something new, and that's what I think. I mean, at least what I would like to see the future of, our spot on the continent is something new coming out of it, really. And I don't know what it'll be called. I don't know what part of land that'll be, but hopefully, I would like to see something new come out of that, and that our ancestors can be a part of that. It'll reflect them, but at the same time, it won't be that same nation. Like, I often think of things like you can think of someone like Charlemagne in Europe. The Carolingians, the Merovingians, I always get the two confused. They don't exist anymore as groups, really. No one calls themselves that. No one calls themselves, a Saxon anymore, or well, maybe some people might, but nobody calls themselves Romans anymore. But you still see that the civilization that existed since then, their image is reflected in it, and it evolved. It evolved into something new, and that's my hope, at least for the future of Canada, and whatever comes out of that.
Yeah, I think that's a useful example. One that I actually use sometimes is I think the modern state of Macedonia is sort of a good example, if anyone's familiar with that. There's a state currently called Macedonia, or now technically Northern Macedonia, and there isn't really any connection to that and the actual ancient Alexander the Great Macedonia. And I think that's a somewhat useful example for where Canada is today. That there isn't really much of a meaningful connection other than the geographical area that we happen to inhabit today with the old Canada, even though the old Canada is only from 100 years ago, or perhaps even less. And I agree that we shouldn't dwell on it in a negative way. And I'm not. when I say it seems as though the old Canada is already dead, I don't actually say that in any particularly depressing way. I'm actually I'm somewhat used to it. When I talk with a lot of boomer conservatives who are absolutely convinced that there's this great silent majority and we're just one election cycle away from like shutting down all immigration and kicking Justin Trudeau out and all this stuff. And I know way too many boomers that actually think that. Um, I mean, that's the really depressing thing, I think, is thinking that we're just almost there to having this real backlash, to getting the real Canada back. When it isn't going to happen, and once I realized that it isn't going to happen, once I realized that we need to just find how we're going to move forward, not try to and try to look to the past for a model, but not and try to be inspired by it, but not thinking that there's some possibility of actually reclaiming the past. Totally. I found that somewhat refreshing. That we're getting used to the fact that that this is the future, and I didn't find it really at all depressing, as depressing as it might sound to accept that the old Canada is dead.
I mean, I don't know if I don't know if I'd go that far. I mean, I would say that there definitely is. I mean, there definitely is positives in places. If you go to the East Coast, like Charlottetown or Nova Scotia, or places like maybe even in the prairies, they're a lot more patriotic. They're a lot more conservative out there. I know that the East Coast is not necessarily very conservative. They always vote Liberal, but there does still seem to be something unique about it. So I don't know if I'd go as far to say that it's entirely dead, it's gone. But I guess the question is just where do you move forward from there? So I think that the biggest mistake you can make is assuming that like the institutions as they exist today are in any way a reflection of what they would have been 50 years ago or 70 years ago, however long you want to say it. Like, for example, I'm pro-monarchy. I do like the idea of monarchy. I would say that I might even consider myself a monarchist in a abstract sense. But I kind of acknowledge that it's not a political model that's really realistic going forward. And B, that the monarchy as it exists in Canada is pretty much irrelevant. I mean, the royal family seem to be pro-globalist. They're doing all that stuff in the UK. I mean, how much, if they care that little about the United Kingdom, how much more would they actually care about us? And just like the various institutions as they exist, they might still have a very nice Gothic building in downtown Toronto. There still might be called the Royal something or other. But all these institutions are pro-globalist. They're all enemies of whatever it is that we would like to conserve. So you do have to make that break from the mainstream. And I thought about that a lot on Remembrance Day, because what you see is that the propaganda coming from the Canadian government year round, it's all stuff like pro-multiculturalism. You look at their propaganda videos, all of them are full of Muslims, LGBT. They do have natives in them, but you'll never actually see any old stock European Canadians. But then on Remembrance Day, they have all these pictures of these white Canadian men in uniform, and I just thought, like, there's this huge disconnect between the propaganda they're using year round and their agenda versus what they're supposedly commemorating on Remembrance Day. So, and then the whole controversy with Don Cherry this year. What I said is I welcome them making that break. I welcome them abolishing that, because I would like to use that symbology. I would like to use that symbology for right-wing political purposes, rather than I want it to be our propaganda. I don't want it to be their propaganda, because I don't think they accurately reflect what they claim to be celebrating on Remembrance Day.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point. And I remember that part from your video. I wanted to touch on that at some point. So yeah, it's actually, I find a certain amount of solace in the fact that we did get rid of the Red Ants in 1965. On one hand, I think it's awful, and I certainly would have opposed it if I was alive back then. But on the other hand, the reason that I have a certain amount of solace in it is I'm at least grateful that the Canada of mass immigration, the Canada of abortion, the Canada of gay marriage is not the Canada that ever had the red ensign. Getting rid of that flag is actually retrospectively, it gives us a clear break between the sort of two eras. It was only, I think, either 2 or 4 years after that when we had no-fault divorce, abortion, and sodomy all legalized. Um, and it almost with our sister nations, Australia and New Zealand, with them never having gotten rid of their traditional flags, at least yet. I'm not saying that I want them to get rid of those flags, but it almost feels like their flags have been sort of dirtied by the modern era in a way that the red ensign sort of stays pristine because it never represented this Canada.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of why.
And we can use it as a symbol, and everyone knows what it means when we use it.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's useful. Because we can actually use it as like a symbol of our own, because the government doesn't claim it to represent the state as it exists today. Because we got to make a big distinction between the state and the nation.
Yeah,
it's a big mistake people make these days. The state is against us in basically every way, shape, and form. But you can still use it as a symbol, and it is very useful for that. And a lot of the what a lot of the left wingers will say is, or not even the left wingers, a lot of maybe like the conservatives will say that it doesn't represent this. It's represents Canadian values, but everyone with half a brain knows that it definitely represents a European Canada. And the left wingers are right when they say that that's what it represents, because that's, really what I would like it to represent. And it's useful to use that symbology. And that's kind of why I welcome them just abolishing things like, all these commemorations of our historical events, because I know that that's what they want to do eventually. So I want to claim that. I want to claim that stuff. I want to claim that for us. I don't want them to be falsely representing it, really.
Yeah. They of course hate the Canada of World War II. If we had a democracy where the only people that got to vote were the World War II veterans, I can't imagine how right wing this country would be. So they pretend to like those people. But that country, that generation, is completely different from what they try to represent today. Yes. So I'm not totally sure what to move on to now. Are there any other topics to do with Canadian history you'd like to discuss?
Well, I guess it would be it's a bit of a mistake to just say that it's entirely dead, because it's still something we can use for our own purposes. So I definitely am pro. I'm definitely in favor of literature, art that represents that, because it's meant to inspire something new for the future. So I don't get too down on the current situation, because like we mentioned with the flag, we're not going to obviously bring back the country that existed under that flag, but it's still something we can use for symbology. So I definitely say not to write off all of Canadian history just like that. So I'd say we can still use it for useful things going forward. And then the other thing I wanted to say was that don't think that it's unique to us. I generally just think like the narrative, for example, that they're pushing. It's like that in every single Western country. I don't know if you agree with this, but I'm of the opinion there is a international agenda going on. What would you say about that?
I agree that the rot in Canada is I think most advanced of probably any Western country. I really can't think of any country that I think is worse. Maybe like Belgium or Sweden.
Yeah, the one thing that, to be honest, I find the most depressing is that, uh, I mean, I don't know if I find this depressing because it is generally still a good thing. Is that, like, we're not nearly as bad off as countries like Belgium or Sweden or the UK or America, because it still is like seemingly a very high, quality of life country, but it's just spiritually. It's just spiritually, it's just the worst. I mean, it just has the absolute, like you said, like the culture has just rotted the absolute most. Oh man,
Yeah. I just mean, even in all those countries you listed, I think there seems to be a bit more of a connection to some sort of nation that exists that doesn't really exist nearly as much in Canada.
Oh yeah, this, like, the Swedish nationalists are doing way better right now than we are in Canada. Yeah. So yeah, I'd say that.
I mean, I don't feel optimistic about any of the countries you listed. I think there's a good chance they're all screwed. I hope that's not the case, but there are certainly many countries that I think are going to do well. I can't imagine things going poorly for Poland. Is always the best example.
Yeah, I guess what I wanted to say was, I mean, I think the point is that, like, I don't think that Canada's in the worst situation materially. In fact, it's probably one of the better ones. But spiritually, yes, it is probably the worst, I'd have to say. Yeah. And which that to me is just what depresses me the most. It's not even, it's not even like the immigration stuff. It's just the lack of any kind of spirituality, any kind of, like, backbone, really. That's what gets me down. But what I wanted to say was that don't think of it as unique to Canadians, that Canadians are particularly a cucked people and that, we hate ourselves and we want our country destroyed. I don't think that's really the case. I don't buy that, that all, white Canadians want their history destroyed. They're all these globalist shit libs who hate themselves, and I don't believe that's true at all. I do think that is true for, the cosmopolitan liberals, your upper middle class shit libs who want to feel virtuous, and then your indoctrinated college students. But you go to a place like North Bay, Sudbury. I'm just thinking of places I go often. Even somewhere like Peterborough or something like that. The working class guy there, he doesn't buy into all this, like, SJW crap. And then I'll also, the point I wanted to say was that what's going on in our country, it's basically the plan that's of subversion that I believe that international forces are using. It's, they demoralize the people, then they delegitimize them. Then they soften them up for mass immigration, and then they start changing the history. They start with the affirmative, then they bring in affirmative action, and then the demonization, and so on. It's the same process everywhere. And I don't want people to think that, like, we were just idiots for falling for it, because it's literally worked everywhere else. Maybe you could argue that these forces, and I think it's unified, I think it's global, they did the best job in Canada. Maybe they played the best metapolitical game, which is bad for us, by the way, to delegitimize, to subvert, to rewrite the history, to implement things like mass immigration, degeneracy, and all that stuff. Maybe they did the best job in Canada, but that is the model that they're using everywhere. It worked it worked quite well. I mean, for them, not for us. In America, they subverted America. It's very similar, but I mean, they're obviously less successful with that one, because there is still a lot of patriotic Americans, and they are a lot more conservative, and they have a lot deeper connection to their history. But you do kind of see it falling apart in Europe, that they're trying the same subversion tactics. And one thing I mentioned about my trip in the UK is that it feels like the subversion was a lot more forced, which is why I think the UK needs to be the most clown world-ish country, because it just looks a lot more unnatural. So I'd say that, I don't think that the model that they're really using is perfect. I think there are holes in it. And I do think that, the reason that we have to have all this censorship now, the reason that there was all these witch hunts for, white supremacist, whatever, neo-Nazi, racist, what you name it, is because they kind of know that they're on thin ice, that they're not at the point where, just whatever they do, it doesn't matter. Like in South Africa, basically, there's no way out of that one. I can't see any way out of it. But you have to understand that in Canada, we're still like 70 population is still like 70% white or so. I think 72.
Yeah, about that.
In 2016, I think it was 72. They can't just they can't just go like full bore, like implementing like a white privilege tax or something like that tomorrow. Though I do think that is coming down the line. The point is that, I guess, don't get too black pilled, because there definitely is space to make improvement. I guess that's what I'd say is, don't think of us as like this particularly cucked country. Don't think of us as all these like idiots who want our own destruction. I don't think it's that bad. But I would agree that it's like spiritually the country is very sick.
Yeah, I agree most with that. I do think Canada, in a certain sense, was perhaps naturally the most susceptible to this, probably just because of our proximity to the United States. We always really have been, at least since the American Revolution, we've always been a country that has been defined by our difference to the United States. I mean, one thing that I'm honestly shocked that left-wingers in Canada haven't picked up on more is Anglo-Canada basically started because of a bunch of refugees. A bunch of
loyalists.
Yeah, the loyalists. I mean, that just seems like such great propaganda for them. These poor refugees came to Canada. I can't imagine why they don't use that more, but I guess that just shows that they're so stupid they don't even know Canadian history well enough to use it against us like that. I mean, I wouldn't refer to them as refugees. That's just, I think, would be a hilarious way for left-wingers to try and use that history. But no, yeah. So, and so that was our opposition towards republicanism back then. And even since the sort of new Canada, there's been sort of a Canada's left-wingness as opposed to American right-wingness has been sort of a defining aspect of the new Canadian identity. But sort of because we're like, a mouse next to a giant, I think there's a certain aspect in which it was always going to be easier for Canada to lose its identity, especially with the fall of the British Empire, where that was, with the monarchy, such a prime aspect of it. And just in the 50s and 60s, while the British Empire was falling apart, it kind of seems like Canada was just kind of a lost people and didn't really know where to go. We didn't have that old source of identity, and we didn't really know what our new source of identity was going to be either. So I don't think I don't at all mean that means that everything that we're going through was guaranteed to happen. I just think those aspects of Canadian history made it easier for this sort of subversion to take place than it was in other countries where they had Sweden, for example, as many problems as they have, that's still a nation that's existed for well over 1,000 years.
Yeah, exactly. I think that because one of the defining factors in Canada was loyalism in opposition to the United States. And yeah, once the British Empire died, Canada did lose a lot of its identity, because that was such a huge part of such a huge part of the entire thing of what it meant to be a Canadian. And I guess one thing that our enemies have done very well is that they've created social credit behind progressivism and liberalism. So and it just speaks to the real snobbery of the progressive agenda right now, because what they do is they'll try to paint the Americans as being backwards, right-wing idiots, and we are not like them. We're more progressive. We're more intelligent than they are. We're better on the world stage. And this is a strategy that I've seen employed in several different countries. Another one being Ireland, that like the Irish, they have like kind of like Canada, that like it's like a left-wing shit lib nationalism. So what it is that they get high off of being like, whereas Canadians get, Canadian progressives get high off of being more progressive than the United States. In Ireland, they're more progressive than the British, and they use the oppression narrative, which is not like in the case of Ireland that they have the narrative like we hate the British because they starved us, which there's a lot of truth to that, but maybe not entirely. But one thing that there's legitimacy to that narrative, but what they've done is that they've painted that, well, we want mass immigration, unlike those racist Brits who voted for Brexit. So my friend Orwell and Good, he used a phrase called globalist gerrymandering. So what you'll see is that they'll support. You'll see that there'll be globalist support for things like the Scottish independence movement or Catalonia. Because in reality, what that actually is, it's not an actual nationalist movement. What it actually is essentially taking a smaller state and making it a lot easier to control. And, it's going to have the same agenda. So basically, what you'd see if Scotland became independent is that they'd have even more mass immigration. They'd have even more of the globalist agenda forced down their throats. And I think that's kind of one thing that really kind of got us in Canada is that it's the like you mentioned, the opposition to America that they've made it like fashionable to be more progressive than America, and it's a problem I'd like to get out of, because it is that's one thing that that's probably the thing I hate the most about Canada. It's just the snobbery of liberalism here. Like I remember when Trump was elected, there was this old YouTube channel. It's called Test Tube. It's called Now This now. It's called Now This. The former name was Test Tube. And they released this video about how progressive Canada was after Trump got elected. And I'd say that was probably the most like embarrassed I've ever, at least on the internet, I've ever been to be Canadian. It's like, Canada is a leading country for LGBT rights and women's rights. And they have liberal abortion laws and embrace multiculturalism with immigrant. And I'm just like, just fucking kill me. Just fucking kill me. But that's one of the major problems we have. It's the kind of the liberal virtue signaling points. It plays into it big here.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It is. I do stand by what I said before about the Canadian nation mostly, at least, feeling dead. But there is a strange sense in which the new Canadian nation is extremely nationalistic in some sense. Though nationalistic in all the worst ways. Nationalistic in, isn't it great how awesome our sodomy and abortions are? Because though I did for the most part not hear about much Canadian nationalism growing up, I did constantly hear about anti-Americanism. I mean, one of the biggest things that was drilled into my head from a young age was how great Canada is.
The George Bush era.
Yeah, definitely. That I was like, I was really, I was relatively young. I guess I was like, 8 to 10ish, around the end of there. But yeah, about how great Canada was because we're not invading Iraq for their oil, or how great Canada is because we have free healthcare and America doesn't.
Oh God.
And I mean, I'm fine with our healthcare system. That's not the issue. But when that was drilled into my head from such a young age, as free healthcare is why Canada is amazing. That is in a weird sense a sort of new nationalism, but it's totally disconnected from the sort of from any sort of traditional nationalism.
You want to know something funny? When I was abroad, there was someone else that I met, and she wasn't Canadian, but she went to school in Canada. And then she said, "You know that there's a Canadian version of the song 'This Is America,' and it's about how Canada has free healthcare and loves Tim Hortons." I'm just like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, but it's true." I'm like, I don't care. I hate these fucking stereotypes.
Yeah.
I really, that is one thing I really fucking, that is probably the thing I hate the most about Canada, these fucking stereotypes, like about I think the healthcare system's actually really good, but I don't like fucking need to act all smug about it. And that is one thing. It just I fucking hate that. The whole it's like, we're more progressive than America.
Yeah. I actually I mean, I don't talk about healthcare policy very much, but from what I'm familiar with it, we actually have basically the worst healthcare system in the Western world except for America. And of course, we only ever compare ourselves to America, so that's fine for us. But like almost all of Western Europe has just according to like the sort of UN international ratings, better healthcare systems than we do. Which is the sort of thing I used to really be on about when I did care about healthcare policy more. Not to say that we need a free market system, because Western Europe obviously doesn't have a free market system, but just that used to be a factoid I'd use a lot to tell Canadians how stupid they are for constantly going on about how amazing their healthcare system is. Because just from the sort of international ratings, we actually don't have a particularly amazing healthcare system. We're just better than America, and that's a really low bar. At least in terms of healthcare. But yeah, we also have a question in the chat. Forza Blianco or whatever. What do most Canadians regard the Commonwealth? And I mean, you can answer this too if you want, but I'd just say for the most part, it's completely irrelevant to our lives.
Yeah, I'd say so too. I mean, I like it. I like it in theory, but the thing is, it's essentially, like I said earlier, it's a globalist institution now, and really the idea. Like, did you hear about that Kanzuk proposal?
Yeah.
For anyone that doesn't know what that is, it was a proposal to have free movement between Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK. And if this was like 1920. And these were all still Anglo. These are still all Anglo British descended nations. I would support that thing. I'd be in favor of that. But I know that what that actually means is that we're going to get a bunch of of Pakistanis from Rotherham coming over to Toronto, and maybe we'll be sending some some Somalis to Australia or something like that. I mean, that's what you have to understand with these things. You can't LARP by thinking that any government-backed institution is on your side, because it really isn't. So that's how you have to regard those things. There was something else I was going to say. I can't remember. Yeah. What I was going to actually ask you is, how much do you think that the whole polite Canadian kind of we're more polite than America, the self-righteousness, how much of that do you really think is very reflective of reality anymore? Because the perception I get is that the progressive movement has made, I do think that maybe in the Bush era, there was some legitimacy to that. I know it's still kind of snobbery and stuff like that, but today they just seem fucking vicious. And it's like that everywhere, maybe even more so in America. But it just seems like a fucking lie right now. I don't see someone like Jasmeet Singh as being a very loving and caring person. I don't see someone like Kathleen Wynne as being a loving and caring person. They actually seem like rather vicious, vindictive, and outright nasty people, really, to me.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't really hear that stereotype as much as I feel like I used to. I feel like that's one of those things like the old progressive virtue of tolerance that they're happy to jettison completely now, just down the memory hole. I think this supposed politeness was useful at one point, and now that progressivism is now that it is as advanced as it is, it just isn't really relevant anymore.
I mean, I get. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, I certainly don't think I've ever noticed Canadians being particularly polite, though I've only ever lived here. So, what am I to know? I certainly wouldn't consider myself to be particularly polite. Perhaps that's something I could work on. But yeah, I don't think Canadians are or ever really have been a particularly polite people. And I think that's just sort of one of the new things that in the 90s or the 2000s was tacked on to Canadian identity, to sort of give us something to distinguish ourselves.
Would you say that Justin Trudeau is kind of the full realization of that? Because I mean, he kind of just seems like the nice guy who always finishes last. because he tried everyone knows the stereotype of the nice guy who's really just a pushover. He's really just a cuck, and he's just someone who gets walked all over. And that's the perception I get of Justin Trudeau. It's like there's no virtue in tolerance.
I know. I mean, I'd say there's probably
pathetic.
like a 50. Sorry, I'd say there's probably like a 50% chance he's a rapist. So I don't know if I'd consider him a nice guy.
Well, okay, but when I say nice guy, I say nice guy in quotes.
Yeah. But no, yeah, I get what you mean. That yeah, he tries to give that nice guy vibe. But yeah, I do think in a lot of ways he is a perfect personification of the current Canada. Like I think his post-national state comment was great. Because I think it was totally accurate. Of course, he thinks it's a good thing, and we don't think it's a good thing. But I think that's one of the most honest statements he's that really any politician has ever made about the current state.
It's an economic zone. It's not a nation.
Yeah, totally. I mean, one metaphor I've used a lot is that Canada almost feels like a hotel, at least in the big cities.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess though, I guess the positive of that is that I kind of feel like Justin Trudeau and the progressive movement, they have lost a lot of the wind out of their sails. And I made a video of this after the election. I know he still won. I know that he's still going to be the prime minister it's looking like another 4 years. But the one thing is that if you remember back in 2015, it was when that YouTube video that I mentioned earlier was released. Well, it was after Trump's election, but when Justin Trudeau was elected, the entire kind of progressive Canada being this modern country leading the way to progress with LGBT feminism, mass immigration, stuff like that, multiculturalism. It seemed like that narrative had a lot more wind in its sails. And 4 years into Trudeau, and it seems so fake, really. I mean, I don't think he believes a word he says. Every time he cries, for apologizing for our horrible past of, turning away one ship that shouldn't have even been there, or whatever it is. I mean, it's all just fake. I don't believe for 1 second he's actually sad over any of that stuff. I don't believe for 1 second he actually believes all this stuff about feminism. I don't believe for 1 second that he actually thinks that Canada is this beautiful mosaic of multiculturalism. Because everything, his entire persona just seems so phony. What he really seems to be doing is just saying whatever's popular with the zeitgeist today, which will keep him in power. And it has done that, because look at the blackface scandal. I mean, it just kind of rolled off of his back. And it just seems so phony, really. And the other thing about the blackface scandal that I said was that no one cared. Absolutely nobody cared. It had no effect on the polls whatsoever, because the people that voted for him, the immigrant vote, they're voting for him because he is benefiting them. And the old stock Canadians who hate him, they're already not going to vote for him. And really very few people other than left-wing activists actually care that much about political correctness. And it just seems like, that I had mentioned earlier that metapolitically they did a good job. They did a good job in subverting Canada. Do you think that's kind of falling apart? Because I get the sense that it kind of is.
Well, I'll answer that question after, but there's one point I'd like to zone in on first, and about the immigrant vote for the Liberal Party. I actually have a sort of hilarious anecdote about this, because the left sometimes tries to deny this, that the reason that they do these things are to flood the country with immigrants and to get them voting for them. But I actually just recently had a professor, just like about a year ago, had a professor that was talking about the Liberals, and the professor was an NDPer, but she was complaining that her mother has voted for the Liberal Party her entire life, And the professor was a Muslim immigrant, or their family was, and she said the reason her mother votes for the Liberals is because Pierre Trudeau let her family into the country, and she feels like she has a loyalty to them. And she and it's just as explicit as it could possibly be. They got in the country because of this one particular, because of Justin Trudeau's family. So she'll be voting for them for the rest of their life. So there's left wingers sometimes try to deny this. They try to pretend that this isn't some sort of big vote racket, but it couldn't be more explicit from the people that are actually doing it.
I definitely agree that it's a racket from the left's perspective. But another conclusion I've come to, like, that was my position about a year ago, that was the driving force behind mass immigration. But I actually am also of the opinion now there's more to it than that. I think it's coming from NGOs and corporations and international finance, and the left capitalizing off of that is just another factor. And the reason I think that is, like, it makes sense from leftist perspective why they would want mass immigration, a left-wing politician, because it guarantees them election success. But what I had kicking around in my mind is that they're obviously not stupid, so they realize this. But if it were from the perspective of a right-wing politician, a conservative, whatever you want to call them, member of the Conservative Party of Canada or the Republicans or in the UK, they know that too. So if their only goal was to be elected, you'd expect they'd want no immigration, because that would be the best election strategy for them. Yet immigration's just gone up under conservative leaders. In Canada, under Stephen Harper, it went up. Under the Republicans, it's gone up. Under the Conservative Party in the UK, it's gone up. And I think that there is a bigger agenda at play, and I think that transcends national politics. That's what I think is the driving force behind mass immigration. I think that the left capitalizing off of the votes is also another factor in that. But I definitely think that the driving force is an international agenda.
Yeah, that could be true. I'm not totally sure. And I'm sorry, what was the other question you had for me before?
Oh, yeah. It was, do you think that the progressive movement has kind of lost a lot of the wind out of its sails? Because it seems that like how I'd mentioned, that metapolitically they crafted a good narrative of us being this progressive, multicultural country that's like more polite, more advanced, and more virtuous than America. Do you think that that's kind of falling apart? Because I tend to think it is.
Yeah, somewhat, but in a sense only because they don't need to maintain that facade anymore. Because the country's so thoroughly divided, it's so easy to win elections for the left. I mean, the Conservative Party winning an election would be a win for them. There's nothing conservative about the Conservative Party, even slightly. So it just, Canada's kind of so broken at this point, they don't even really need to maintain that facade.
Yeah, so you think they might just go full on global homo, like accept it or die? Well, maybe not die. Well, no, not that extreme, at least not yet. But like accept it or face the gulags.
Yeah.
I
mean, they're literally happy to say that they'll destroy your life if you just don't accept their basic premises.
One thing that's
trying to take your children away.
One thing that's absolutely terrifying is the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Have you heard of them?
I've heard you mention them, but I don't really know much details.
They're essentially a group like the ADL. So what they are is I don't know if I should say who's running the group. Okay, you know who's running the group. It's a group like the ADL, the SPLC, or the Hope Not Hate in the UK. And it's a group backed by, it's a organization backed by a certain group and run by them, which essentially is a doxing, harassment, and smear group that is designed to ruin the lives of right-wingers. So, for example, there's a guy named Travis Patron. He's trying to start his own political party called the Canadian Nationalist Party. And they threatened to dox every single person who registered for them, because they need to register to become a political party in Canada, they need to register to. They need to have enough people register for their political party. I think it's 200 to actually be able to enter into Elections Canada to become an official party. And what this network called the Canadian Anti-Hate Network said, they were going to smear every single member. Now, this stuff is public, so you can access it. But what they're essentially going to do is put that information out there so they can contact all the employers of these people, get them fired from their jobs, harass them, and essentially try to ruin their lives. So then this is an organization specifically designed to ruin the lives of right-wingers. And one of my friends, Cracker Jack, who used to run the podcast, the Ensign Hour, they essentially the Canadian Anti-Hate Network smeared them, and he got into a lot of trouble for it. But the thing one thing he mentioned to me was that the Conservative Party of Canada is funding these people. Not the Liberal, not just the Liberals, but the Conservatives are backing them too.
Yeah, well, I as bad as they are, I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah.
As bad as the Conservatives are, I wouldn't have expected them to do that. But yeah, the Conservative Party is completely lost. I would. I mean, like I said, I know a lot of boomer conservatives. I sort of run in those circles a lot. And I knew a lot of boomer conservatives that they wanted to do anything possible to defeat Justin Trudeau. And just supporting the Conservative Party is I think about the worst thing you could possibly do from a right-wing perspective in Canada today, because they supporting the Conservative Party is saying that you're okay with a right that will be permanently ineffective.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the one question is, and I'm always opposed to the ridiculous concept of accelerationism. I hate that concept, and anyone that pushes it is stupid, in my opinion. So, I mean, obviously, if I had to choose between a party that wants 350,000 immigrants a year versus only 300,000, I mean, that's still mass immigration. That's still replacement level, but still, it's better than the alternative. So I'm not going to vote for one that is worse deliberately, because that's just going to make it
worse. I definitely wouldn't say you should vote for the Liberals or anything. But I voted for the PPC.
I did too. Yes.
Yeah, but I would have sooner voted for no one than vote for the Conservatives. Not that I want the Liberals to win, just that hopefully, if voting for no one could possibly mean something slightly more actually conservative could exist in the future.
Yeah, but what I thought though was that how much worse are the Liberals than the Conservatives? And I mean, I guess for certain they're slightly better, but I think that you can't get too caught up in the whole Justin Trudeau, anti-Trudeau. And look, I don't like the guy at all. That's no secret. But our problems run a lot deeper. And like you had mentioned, the boomer conservatives who just hate Justin Trudeau and want him gone no matter what, even if it is not really beneficial. I think that it would have been beneficial to get rid of him. But the thing is, it's that's not the real battle that we're fighting. It's a much longer term fight. And that's what the focus needs to be on. It can't be on just trying to essentially just rooting for a political party rather than rooting for an actual meta political direction. That's what you can't get into.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like I said, the boomer cons. I mean, I've met multiple boomer cons that before the election would literally say stuff like the country is going great, and then Justin Trudeau got in charge. And it's just with that, it's that level of disconnect that I really that we really need to fight, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's definitely something that you do need to get away from, because you have to understand that it's a problem that's decades old. So it's not just something that Justin Trudeau brought about. Stephen Harper was just as much of a globalist through and through as Justin Trudeau. one thing that did annoy me was that there's actually, like, I can understand some boomer believing this, but there's this guy I know. He's like maybe 26, 27, and he's basically like he does campaigns for the Conservative Party. He had like a Stephen Harper poster from one of the election campaigns, and I just said to him like, what have they conserved? And I guess maybe it's because he's worked with them, but he seems to just be like a cheerleader for a jersey, like as if it's a sports team rather than actually a conservative movement. Like, he didn't seem bothered by the fact that they haven't conserved anything. If they won the election, then apparently they won. And what I said to him was, what are they going to do when essentially the Liberals basically just continue to rip apart Canada's history? I'm like, and he says, oh, when the Conservatives win, we'll change it back. I'm like, no, they won't. The Conservatives aren't going to change it back. There's no way that's going to happen. But yeah, that is something that, we do really need to focus on politics that transcend the election cycle, because, and I know that you've read Moldbug. As he says, like, it's just a constant drift to the left. You see, like, the conservative of today is a radical liberal of 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Oh,
I was just going to say that this seems like a good place to end it.
Yeah, I think so. We had went on for about an hour. Thanks for having me on. It seems like a good channel so far, and I watched a few of your videos, and keep up the good work, and hopefully your channel grows.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you everyone for watching. Please, I'm sure most of you are probably already subscribed to Endeavour, but if not, check out his channel. It's pretty good. And everyone, please give me a subscribe if you aren't subscribed here yet. And thanks for watching. Bye, everyone.